Hey there, all you creepers and reapers. Welcome to another episode of the Femme Fatalities. I'm your co-hostess, Anna, and I am here with none other than...
It's Margaret. Hey there, you grieflings and frightlings. And do we have a blood-sucking cast for you today? Anna, what are we talking about today?
Well, we are talking about none other than a story as old as time with a few modern twists. You know, our little bloodsuckers from beyond. None other than Little Miss Abigail.
Ooh, yes, Little Miss Abigail. Trigger warnings.
Blood.
Blood. Yes, a bloody one.
Hunger. Insatiable hunger. A little bit of body horror. Yeah, but more carnivorous type behavior. So vampire behavior. Um, I would also say isolation. So if you're triggered by isolation or group dynamics that involve strangers, items of that, if you get anxious when you're introduced to a new group, this may not be a movie for you. Also, anything that involves like a situation where you've been in lockdown before or restrained, anything like that, if that makes you uncomfortable, you may not want to see this film either. Family dynamics, parental approval seeking is definitely a theme in this as well. Recovery, we have some characters that were involved in different sorts of lifestyles. One is in recovery. And I think just dwelling on mistakes of the past. So if any of these things may trigger you, you might want to think about seeing the film twice before you watch it. We definitely just want to give you a heads up on that. But I say, we go ahead and take a bite and dive in. What do you think, Margaret?
Let's go for it. Also, there is some abuse of power in one of the characters, particularly part of his backstory and just who he is as an overall person. So if you have trouble with like misogyny or corruption, this one character he's not the most savory of people.
No. But then you don't feel bad when
No, you're like waiting for him to die. Like
yeah. Well, and that's the thing too, is not to dive right in, but I do feel like most of the characters are sort of likable, but they're not particularly likable. So it makes it a little bit of an easier watch. The one I thought was most likable was actually Abigail herself, because she's highly intelligent and motivated.
Yes, and this is fun for her. This is like a game to her, and like once you realize that, you're like, oh, okay, like this is something that she does, like her entertainment.
Yeah, it's just how she rolls. And I think it's great. I think that it's a very new take on a vampire movie. I love the fact, and I have to compare here. I love Anne Rice. I love Interview with a Vampire. But the fact that Abigail is not sexualized at all in this movie made me so happy, because she is supposed to be a 12-year-old human girl in the beginning when we're introduced to her, right? We find out that she's something quite different later on, but I love the fact that she is not sexualized at all in the film.
Yes.
You find out she's like a few hundred years old, right? But still, there's none of that. And that made me so happy. Like, she is, viewed as a child, and then we find out that she's actually like, metaphysically like a grown-ass old woman. But I really appreciate that was not done in the film.
Yeah, I agree. It was refreshing because she was a child, and so often I feel like this whole film, it was refreshing because the vampires weren't sexualized. They were
they're
coexisting and feeding and doing their thing, which was really nice, because so often vampires are so overly sexualized in society, and they're playing on that we've discussed before, human sexuality. And it was just really nice to get below that and go into like, no, like they're predators and they're going after their prey.
Yeah, you gotta eat. And I think that's great that they did it that way. You know, it was really enjoyable to see that. And the cast was really fun. A girl from Lisa Frankenstein was in it, which I was like, wait a minute here. She looks familiar. But it was enjoyable. Even some of the things that Abigail did, like after, you know, biting someone, the mind control, it was different than what we're used to seeing. And of course, for me, you know that The Godfather is like one of my favorite movies, right? My heritage, it has to be. But I enjoyed the little kind of organized crime twist. I was like, man, you know that could work, you know. To amass your fortune and your empire, you're going to live forever, so you do have to sustain yourself financially. And there aren't kind of these normal worries that you and I have as human creatures, you know, guilt and repercussion because you're not, you know, you're not going to die, right? So, um, you know, live forever, might as well do whatever you want, I guess. But I did find it to be just fun because it was like, oh, we've learned something new. And then about 10 or 15 minutes later, it's like, oh, we're learning something else new. So it kind of kept the audience, I think, more engaged.
Oh, I completely agree. And as you're talking about like guilt and repercussions, part of that story is carried through when they're talking about the organized crime, like head hitman that has just
Mm-hmm.
took out like a whole floor of FBI agents or whatever it is. And then when you learn that that's like Abigail and she's
Mm-hmm.
doing it for her dad's attention, like
I
it's just
know. Just like,
adds
oh.
to like she has no guilt, she has no
Mm-hmm.
repercussions, and then what drives her, she really just
Mm-hmm.
wants a
Right. And
relationship with her dad.
yeah, and it's the whole parental approval, which I think, you know, that's a theme that a lot of people relate to. And, you know, familial approval in general is, you know, how many of us were raised hearing this or had friends whose family told them you have to do things a certain way. You don't want to disappoint the family. Um, and I just think that that kind of hit a really good point that um, it's something, it is a struggle that everyone, you know, can relate to, is just the approval seeking, very, whether it's friends, family, colleagues, professors, you know, educators, whatever. All of us are struggling with trying to find approval from someone at some point in our lives.
And the lengths that we'll go to
Mm-hmm.
get that approval.
Yeah. I mean, we don't really, you know, it's for some of us, it can get to the point where we don't care who we hurt or, you know, whose energy we feed off of to get it, I guess you could say. But she's
Yes.
fun. I mean, I do love that she's a ballerina because it brings her so much joy. And I think that showing this sweet, kind kid in the beginning, we often forget that, like, these creatures who are monsters in movies, they are, you know, creatures that started off as humans. So, like, we're talking about like vampires, anyone with lycanthropy, the Invisible Man, even, they all started out just as regular humans. And you carry some of that human inside of you once you've kind of entered the metaphysical realm. And I really enjoy and appreciate that that part of the lore wasn't lost.
Yes. I agree with you on vampires and werewolves. I'm gonna have to disagree with the invisible man. I feel like he was
He was
sociopathic
he
to
was kind of
begin
ashamed to
with.
be human to start with. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
I
true.
don't feel like I feel like he actually got worse
Mm-hmm.
with it and he wasn't good to begin with. Whereas like werewolves and vampires, we often see their struggle with their
Yeah.
humanness and their monsterness. And I
Mm-hmm.
think in that humanness, you touch on the relationship with Abigail and Melissa Barrera's, I hope I
Mm-hmm.
say her last name correctly, character, right? That she's playing on that like mother instinct and how Melissa's character really wants to be a good mother because she
Yeah.
carries this guilt about not being a good mother because of being in recovery, being an
Mm-hmm.
addict. And Abigail, in a way, gives her that chance to be the mom she wants to be, like that
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I really, and it's fun because then you find out these backstories of like all of these characters too. And the fact that, so I enjoy Abigail is presenting herself as just this innocent person who's completely unaware and naive, but she set up everything. And
Hmm.
and I appreciate that. I've kind of come to the conclusion she's probably an air sign. Or was at some point. Um, it's just, it's fun. It's cool. Like, don't underestimate people, I think is really kind of a great thing too. The end for me though, I really, I was hoping for something way different. This is totally demented. I don't care, but I was actually kind of hoping that, our survivor, I forget the character's name, but I was hoping that she would join the Hellish Vampire Legion, and then, like, you know, her son would join the Legion too, and then they just have like a happy little vampire family. But
Yes.
that didn't happen, and that's okay too. We don't always get what
Yes.
we want, but it would have been
Melissa
cute.
Barrera actually said she was hoping they do a sequel because she really wants to be a vampire,
Yeah,
and that she realizes that the young actress that played Abigail
needs a
is a
mother.
child that
Yeah,
is maturing. And
yeah.
so the chances of them having a sequel that really honors
Hmm.
Abigail, it's
Hmm.
impossible because she's stuck at 12, and the actress who
Yeah,
plays Abigail is not stuck at 12.
exactly. Yeah. That's a good point, but it would have been a cute ending. But
Yeah, I would have liked that ending. I loved the kills. Like, oh my gosh.
mhm, they were so creative. It was
Hmm.
fun.
Yes.
Yeah. But I am curious though, the one guy we, because he dies before we get to find out too much about him, the getaway driver, I
Hmm.
do wonder what he did to end up there because we didn't really find out that much about him. So I was like, maybe if there is a sequel, we'll find that out.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm. Well, and you bring up a really good point. Of course, we're going to segue into grief a little bit. Um, the little girl that's still inside of Abigail, right? So we all kind of have, this little young, sweet, kind version of ourselves that we hold near and dear to our hearts, right? At whatever specific point or age in our lives, we have this version of ourselves that we think back to sometimes and almost romanticize and reminisce about. But that's also, I feel, the part of ourselves that gets hurt the most and kind of holds on and sustains that hurt. Particularly when we're looking at like change or loss or grief. What do you think, Margaret?
Yeah, our younger selves, like our inner child, our inner children, how are they impacted? How do they show up when we are
Mhm.
grieving, when we experience a trauma? We could look at Abigail's grief, just that
Mhm.
she's not going to ever mature. And we see that when she confronts her dad, when she's telling Melissa's character about when her dad made her into a vampire. And then he didn't take the responsibility, which we can see too reflected. Melissa had a kid, her character did,
Mhm.
and she didn't take the responsibility because of drugs. So all these ways that grief impacts all of our developmental stages.
Oh, of course. And how even as adults, when something happens, of course we're physically, biologically aging, unlike Abigail, but when something happens, how we regress emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, two times that we experienced that sort of hurt before, and how that impacts us. Like a great example of that is, maybe someone in childhood had an incident and it made them feel guilty and like they couldn't trust people, right? So then as we navigate our adulthood and through life, it's going to be much easier when bad things happen to still have that magical thinking that somehow if I would have been a better person or accomplished more or whatever it is, maybe this wouldn't have happened the way it did. And then like, well, I can't talk about it because I can't trust anyone, and if you're going through that or anything related to grief and loss and you're listening right now, like there are services and supports out there. You can call 988 anytime. There's always someone there to receive you and try and help you through and provide some suggestions of things that might be local to you as well. And there are also tons of telehealth services. Margaret, can you name a few of the telehealth services?
I would say reach out. Like, I love Inclusive
Mm-hmm.
Therapists. They're a great website to find a therapist. And then just asking the therapist if they provide telehealth. Therapy Done is another great website to find therapists. Both of those sites, Inclusive Therapist is BIPOC oriented and LGBTQIA oriented. So is Therapy Den. So they both are really trying to make sure that they have a wide variety of therapists to meet everybody's needs. So I would go to those two websites to find somebody and then just ask, does the provider provide telehealth? Do they take your insurance? All of those sort of questions. Do they specialize in grief? Do they specialize in trauma? Is it childhood trauma, adult trauma? You can ask all these questions so that you can get your needs met.
Awesome. And something else too about the movie Abigail, like if we look at her father, and the grief that parents feel, like as I do not have fletchlings yet. But and Margaret does have kids. I imagine as a parent, you try to do what you think is best at the time, even if situations are difficult for your kids to navigate. It's really what you thought was best at the time. So I imagine he probably feels some level of guilt, just looking at it from a thanatological perspective, and he buries himself in his work because he doesn't know what to do now, because he's really taken the opportunity of growing up and living life from his daughter.
Yes, oh, I love that point, right? His guilt about taking her ability to age and even his desire to have a child that
Mm-hmm.
never ages, to have somebody that will always be there for him, always be dependent on him, just never age. As parents, it can be like we grieve because our kids grow up and we're like, oh my gosh, when you were 8, when you were 12, when all these milestones, and then they become adults. And here Abigail is, she's grieving that she doesn't get those
Mm-hmm.
milestones because he's kept her at 12 for whatever needs that he was trying to satiate when he created her. And we don't
Mm-hmm.
know. We can just see both of them grieving and him not taking
Yeah.
accountability as a parent. Like, parents who are listening, when your kids come to you and ask for you to take accountability because of something that happened, even if you don't get it, if they're like, oh, I never got over when you yelled at me when I spilled Kool-Aid on the brand new white carpet,
Mm-hmm.
you just get to say, I am really sorry
Yeah.
that that impacted you. I'm really sorry that I screamed at you. I'm so sorry,
Mm-hmm.
because that can be so healing. That's what Abigail needed in that moment, for him to say, I'm sorry that I created you at 12
Mm-hmm.
and took all your opportunities to grow up.
Absolutely. And family therapy exists for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't feel comfortable to communicate to a parent or child or sibling or cousin or whatever it is, there are family resources out there and family therapy services. So it's definitely something that is an option. There are facilitators that can help you with your communication. By all means, if you feel like communicating with someone who is related to you may be detrimental to one or either of you, or both of you, then don't move forward with that. But for those of you that are listening that do think it would help, if you're not able to kind of set up these conversations on your own, there are professionals who do this for a living, who are educated and experienced, who can help you with this.
Yes, yes. Go to those websites. There's family therapists
Mm-hmm.
on there.
Absolutely. You deserve to have the best life you can, and those around you to enjoy and take part in that as well. Anyone that you want involved. So keep that in mind. And hey, if you're listening and you're a vampire, you kind of deserve to have the best undead experience that you can too.
Yes, you get to heal everything too.
Exactly, and not just like your body heals quick. We mean like on the inside to heal your
Mm-hmm.
heart
And all your grief, because I'm guessing vampires carry a whole bunch of grief because all of the death that they've witnessed for living forever, and even their friends that they've witnessed being murdered, and
Oh
the
yeah.
trauma of being hunted and not seeing the sun.
It's a lot. Yeah. And I
Yes.
feel like too, even if they had like pets, that's sad too, because then, animals don't live forever. Well, no one, unless you're a vampire, lives forever. So it's just, it's something to kind of think about. And maybe that's a way to think about things too. What you're going through right now, think to yourself, if I lived forever, is this how I'd like it to be indefinitely? And if the answer to that is yes, hey, congratulations, awesome, good for you, sustain yourself, keep doing what you're doing. But if it's no, or even maybe, then think about what it looks like for you to be in a position where if things went on and on and on, what would make you happy and comfortable and secure. And saying that, no one's going to be happy every day. I mean, that's just a fallacy, but something that at least would give you comfort and security.
Yes, I agree. Yes, yes, yes. And also, if you live forever and something happens, you can be like, if I'm living forever in 100 years, is this going to matter? Because so often we
Mm-hmm.
get so stressed, so upset that something happens and we can't see through the weeds. And then
Yeah.
being like, okay, in a week, how important will this be? In a month, in a
Mm-hmm.
year, in 5 years, in 100 years, where is this going to matter in the grand scheme of
Exactly.
my life? And so often that can give us perspective when we're just spinning and ruminating and spiraling, just caught in it. I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, this is hurting now. In a week, it'll hurt less. In a month, it'll hurt less. Grief often ebbs and flows, though. So
Mm-hmm.
this is for more like anxiety or, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that thing in that
Yeah.
meeting or this or that, to be like, okay, in the grand scheme
Like the
of
heat of
life,
the moment. Yeah. Yeah.
yes. I was mortified on a bus in like seventh grade when I fell in a lady's lap when the bus hit the brakes. I thought forever that embarrassment was going to
You'd be the
follow me.
girl that fell.
Yes. And now I'm like, that really,
Yeah.
no, it's not even significant anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, my friends laughed at me. Yes, the lady gave me this horrific look. I fell in her lap. I fell on her. Now she probably just tells a funny story about being
Yeah.
on the bus and the mortified seventh grader that landed in her
Mm-hmm.
lap. But in seventh grade, I was
Oh yeah.
horrified. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what kind of matters to us, especially when we're super self-conscious, like in those pre-adolescent and adolescent years, even young adulthood, like early to mid 20s, even sometimes up to when we're 30, a lot of those things don't really amount to a hill of beans after a while.
Mm-hmm.
So, to paraphrase my grandmother, uh, but it's kind of fun to think about it in that way. Like, if I was a vampire, like you said, and I lived forever, it's gonna bother me next century? Probably not.
Yeah. No. So, what is my vampire legacy going to be? Like Anna was saying, am I where I want to be? Or do I
Mhm.
actually need to change some things?
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. Well, speaking of vampire legacies, who do you most relate to in the film?
Ooh, that is a great question. I guess maybe Melissa Barrera's character, just stressed and trying to do what's best. And I think we can all relate, like being in a hole and trying to get ourselves out of a hole. And in
Mhm.
that progress, right, then oftentimes we create a little bit more depth in the hole as we're trying to get out. And that just in the end, she saw people as people. How about you?
I have to say Abigail. It just because for me it's more of confuse them with the superficial and then knock them out with your mind.
Ooh.
Yeah, and that really that's kind of who she is to me in a nutshell. And I aspire to be as strategic of a planner as Abigail is one day. Not in the same context, but I think she does deserve kudos for her planning talents.
Yes. Ooh, I love that. That's awesome answer.
Oh, well, she's Abigail. We give you props.
Yes.
Yes, very cool. Well, yeah, it's a great movie. If you're looking for something a little bit different, off the beaten path for vampires, this is awesome. I can't say enough good things. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. It was a fun movie.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. It
Mhm.
was, yeah. And going in, I think I was a bit skeptical because I think I try to ignore reviews, but you can't help it when you're on the internet and things come through. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, it's disappointing. I was like, no, this was actually
No,
just
it's
a
great.
fun vampire movie.
Yeah.
That's what it was, and that's what they
Mhm.
delivered. And I really appreciate that they delivered what they said they were.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you 110%. So if you're listening, you haven't seen it, go see it, enjoy it,
Yes.
let us know what you think. Um, Tell us how you feel about Abigail and the entire film and the other characters.
Yes, please do.
Yes.
So thank you for listening.
Yeah, well, I guess it's time for us to get back to the boneyard and see what we can dig up for the next episode.
Yes. See you next time.
Bye.